The key is to watch Hunt as the cards come out, because this is when he sees them.
Not a standard open under the gun, but I haven't been very active, so I'm going to V-pip it.
So we have a mediocre hand, we're getting a great price, and we're gonna see a flop. I'm a little curious about Nick's flatting range in that position, but Berkey is also under the gun. Maybe he could have some stronger hands that he's flatting because Berkey is under the gun, but I'm not sure.
Check.
So I'm pretty free to size up here, especially against two ranges. Nick's range is going to touch here somewhat. He's going to have some King X, he's going to have some Queen Jack, but I actually block a lot of it. So his most likely holding is going to be King Queen, and then like pocket pairs that are just going to have to give up rather quickly. So I'm actually going to start with a 2/3 pot bet. Let's actually go 3/4 pot.
70.
Okay, so I flatted this spot pre sort of following the game plan that I mentioned before about just expanding due to the fact that we're deep. This is a cool and teachable flop because the dynamic worth mentioning is that my gutter outs are worth tons more implieds than they would be if I were 100 deep. So I know this doesn't look good, but it's actually quite great in terms of potential implieds, I guess. So if you're gonna take one thing from this spot, this is a far better spot to call on the flop with depth than it would be if we were 100 deep, because when I do spike either one of my backdoors, my gutter or my backdoor, it's gonna end up super profitable for me. It's pretty much that simple. And it's important that I'm drawing to like the stone nuts on that gutter ball too, which I am. Also notable is that the flop is rainbow, so my straight draw has less tainted outs.
This card is much more connective to me than him. I do block Queen 10, which is very important. He will have some King X of hearts. I block the 10 of hearts, so that restricts him to King Queen and King, yeah, just King Queen of hearts. So he'll only have one combination of the nut flush draw. I think I get to trip off with my hand. Sure, sometimes I'm gonna have the best hand here, but really I'm just trying to focus in on his weak ace X suited and his King Queens. Again, you know, he'll have some King 10, but not much. So yeah, it's a narrow target that I'm shooting at, but so are the range of hands that can actually go call, call, call. For him, it's just gonna be like ace jack, two combos of ace deuce suited, and then probably King Jack as well. But I imagine he only has the suited variety of those, leaving him with only one combo. So I'm gonna keep with the line. I'm gonna bet 3/4 pot here and then reevaluate river, but probably be looking at an overbet on the river.
Okay, I can no longer play a check call. Implieds have gone down and I can't give realization value to better bluffs in Berkey's range, which every bluff is better than mine. So that's out. So we have a check raise or a fold opportunity. Normally I wouldn't consider ever making a play here, but I do think Berkey is the type of player who could be reasonably wide on a triple Broadway board, just because I think he knows to barrel that relentlessly. That's probably just, well, it is really effective versus the pool, and he would be correct to be bluffing quite a bit here. I also think I have kind of a cool meta in the sense that I sort of just bluff chin, and there's this old adage that the best time to bluff is right after you bluff. So not reading too deep into that, but just not letting it discourage me from a move that I think could provide a combination of exploitative fold equity, and the gutter ball implieds are clearly pretty sweet. So cliffs are, generally I need more equity to do what I'm about to do, but I'm making an exception versus Burke. Sizing here is something between 6 and 8. So I'll just do 7.
7.
Okay. So it's 520 more to me into a pot of 600 or 1100, sorry, or 1120. So I'm being laid about 2.5 to 1. We're gonna have about pot behind. No hand in his range really wants to take this line. He has 3 combinations of queen 10 suited. I don't think jacks peel flop for the sizing I chose. It's possible, but it's improbable. I think ace king 3 bets pre. Ace deuce can't start check raising, neither can ace jack. This just really reeks of a bluff. I'm just wondering, like, which of his bluff catchers is he most likely to be turning into a bluff? Could have a similar hand as me. Could have jack 10 of spades, or nope, jack 10 of clubs or diamonds. Diamonds makes most sense. Spades, or sorry, clubs should probably fold flop. So he has one combination there. I mean, even if he has like deuces, this isn't really incentivized. I'm clearly gonna, when I choose this polarized sizing, I'm probably following through on the river. I just think having the 10 here is pretty important for me. I'm gonna have a hard time not arriving at a shove, I think. I'm just trying to figure out like what hands I would be willing to go with here through an all-in as opposed to just through a call. And the reason why it's difficult for me to take a call line is because I don't really think there are many hands he can have here that don't have me beaten. So if he's choosing this with like a hand like queen jack, king queen, king 10, those types of holdings, and then follows through with a shove on the river, unimproved, I'm just gonna have to fold. I can't really call off. But if I smash those hands through right now, I think that it's going to be very difficult for him to make any sort of hero call with showdown value. I guess my most likely shove throughs here for pot would be like ace king plus. My call downs would be like ace jack, perhaps some queen 10 of hearts. I may just like call with that. This plays dicey. I think I have the candidate to do so. I think that I have enough hands that would want to protect here, particularly if I had ace king without the heart. If I had Queen 10 without a heart if I had sets. Yeah, I think this is just a giant game of chicken where we both kind of recognize some imbalances in our lines and I have advantage. So I'm all in.
So if Burke thinks I'm super poled here, which I think I'm fairly polarized to a straight, I think it would be sort of a value own to be raising thinner than that. Then I would have thought that he would have just called. So I can't really speak for how he sees this spot, but something tells me that like there could be a portion of his range that just doesn't believe me and is ripping a flush draw. With how big I raised, I'm so pulled that it doesn't really make a ton of sense to me why he would be jamming anything in his range. It seems like he would want to keep me in the lead and just catch the portion of my range that is bluffs following through on the river. But yeah, just confusing, and clearly I can't do anything about it, but those are my thoughts.
There's always the urge to do something more creative or more clever. Like when I call Berkey with 3-2 suited on the small blind when he opens MP, and then I check raise a naked gutter on the turn. Like, not prudent. Probably need a better gutter to even consider that. But went with just the read that Berkey's aggro, and he was, and then he rejammed on me. So it's like, it's the type of game where it doesn't really help. This is actually pretty cool. Just thinking about this. This is the type of game where it doesn't just help to be right. You need to be right and be the one to put the last bet into the pot. Because I was right, and he fucking ripped on me with like a nut blocker, and like you're handcuffed.
I do think that maybe I could run into some hands of value that he chooses to check raise here that have me in bad shape. But just in a general sense, it seems like a glaring imbalance to me. And anytime that presents itself and you have equity, it's a pretty good time to step on the gas and leverage your opponent.
Raise to 30.
Okay, we are just getting put in all the spots. This hand could go either way. I think flatting is completely fine, and given my image, probably should lean that way. But I also think that like I can create a dynamic with Nick where we're just constantly battling back and forth. I am going to choose the 3-bet. I'm going to choose the 3-bet on the slightly smaller side. So I'm going to go 130.
Raise to 130.
So this is a pretty interesting spot. Nick has been opening a little tighter in the last few orbits than he was earlier, I think. Or at least he's been a little bit less active. Berkey's been the most active player at the table. I have a pretty reasonable 4-bet candidate here, given that I unblock a lot of the hands that Berkey might 3-bet and fold, like the suited aces. I block, obviously, some of the top portions with my king, and I have a good amount of playability if I do get flatted, so I think this is actually a pretty reasonable cold 4-bet spot. With Berkey going to a sizing of 130, I think that I need to probably go in the region of something like 400, maybe a little bit bigger than that. So I think I'm going to take this spot and go with it.
Raise to 425.
So I'm pretty relieved by Matt's sizing here. I think that a lot of his range is, yeah, I think in this formation, he's kind of incentivized to be making a size that will reduce SPR and put me to tougher decisions. At 425, I kind of just get to call with a really big portion of my linear range. Now, that could mean that he's also choosing to be 4-betting here at a more linear rate than we would expect, meaning he'll have hands that dominate me that we wouldn't otherwise anticipate, like king, queen, king, jack suited. But if that's true, then there's also going to be hands that I'm performing better against. That said, we'll be moving into the flop at about 3-to-1 SPR, which gives me a lot of interesting post-flop decisions. We'll have availability to both float and raise in position. So yeah, this should be a fun one.
Call.
So this is a pretty interesting board. I think that neither player in this hand can really have a 6. And it's very hard for anybody to have pocket 8s. So my guess is that I'm going to retain the range advantage here, but I'm a little bit worried about the fact that Berkey can still have some slow plays. However, my king does block some of those. So I think I can pretty much c-bet my entire range here, and I think a small sizing is going to do reasonably well, considering that I have some backdoor outs that I can barrel, and I have 2 overcards that are reasonably clean outs. So I'm going to go with around a kind of 40% pot sizing.
At 380.
So I think Matt's making a small mistake here with his sizing. I don't doubt that he has a pretty strong range here, both bluffs and value. The reason I say this though is because this is going to arrive us at the turn with about a 1.75 to 1 SPR, and there's just like, there aren't a plethora of turns where he wants to be all in for almost 2x pot, where he can expect to get called by worse. So I actually think that like this is a board texture where his range would have performed a lot better sizing up. Obviously I have a clear float here, and he's gonna recognize that. It'll be interesting to see what he does on the 7 of spades, 5 of spades, 9 of spades, 8 of spades. All cards that I feel like I can push enough equity with and potentially win this pot. I do block kings, I block some 10s. You know, I'm not gonna have a lot of fold equity against jacks, queens, or aces on those cards, but that's not exactly all of his range. He'll have a lot of ace king, ace queen, ace jack suited. So assuming I don't get unfortunate run into the spade varieties of those, I will be able to make a play here at some frequency.
This is an interesting turn card. I think it's a little unfortunate that it's one of the turn cards that doesn't give me any additional equity. I don't have a gut shot, I just have 1 overcard to the board at this point. And it's also unfortunate that if Matt has a hand like ace queen of hearts, king queen of hearts that's just floating in this spot, then he's now picked up a flush draw, which means he's not folding. So even though this was a hand where I was willing to barrel any 7, any club, any 9, I think that this is one of the cards where I kind of have to check and just pretty much give up versus bet. But I do think that if it goes check-check, I'm going to have some bluffing opportunities on the river. So we'll see how Matt responds once I check this turn.
Check.
I'm really surprised to see Matt start checking this card. I don't think that this is a card where I get to start bluffing. I will have a lot of equity, but I won't have a lot of very strong hands. My 6x is pretty compromised here by the presence of the 8, and just simply that I don't have a lot of 3-bet calls with 6x. So I'm going to be pretty resigned to a lot of like 1-pair type hands, some jack x, some 8x of hearts, or even 9-10 of hearts, but I really don't get to start bluffing with any of it. Effectively, I think what we're looking at here is if he bets on a 7, I can be all in some of the time. Just analyzing basically how he'll be constructing his river bets. Outside of that, I'm kind of hoping to make a 10 and have it win at showdown. I think my king is dirty. He probably has a lot of ace king that he knows is just winning right now, or at least believes so. And he's pretty protected by having the heart varieties of those. So I'm gonna check back. I'm rooting for a 7 or a 10, and we'll play the river accordingly.
So that's an interesting river card after Matt checks behind. Obviously none of the backdoor flush draw, well, the backdoor hearts didn't get there. I think that there's a limited amount of Jack X in Matt's range, maybe just some Ace Jack suited type hands, and those could potentially bet the turn. I think that I can still have some hands in my range like Aces, Kings, Queens that may check the turn with some frequency. I can still have potentially even Jacks full. And I can also have a certain amount of King Jack, Ace Jack that can check the turn with the intention of value betting rivers like this. Given that I have King high and I have no showdown value, and given that I also block Ace King, which is one potential bluff catcher, as well as a hand like King Jack of clubs, which could play this way and check back the turn, call river, I think this is a reasonable bluff candidate. There's about 1650, 1700 in the pot or so, and I think that a good sizing here is going to be somewhere in the region of half pot. So I would imagine that something like 900 to 950 is going to work. So I'm going to put something like that out there.
So I think that Matt could just be bluffing with the best hand here when he doesn't have it. I think Jack's full is very reasonable. I think this sizing is fine also with Queens, Kings, or Aces, even Ace Jack, should he possess that type of hand. It's interesting that he did choose to bet because I don't exactly have a lot of calls. I think he's mostly targeting my ace highs, which can't really do anything. The 7, I think, would have been the best card in the deck for me to bluff. And I probably would have found a way to be all in with it, either if Matt led or if he checked. The 9 was probably the second best card, but I don't have the same availability to re-shove over a bet simply due to the fact that I don't really have a lot of pocket jacks. He does. Pocket 9s is definitely in my range, but not a huge portion of it. So basically, like, I would just be repping too thin. I guess if I had Queen 10, it's reasonable that I should be all in here. But I think I would prefer to actually have 7-5. That way he would still have queens and 10s to potentially call me with. Either way, I don't really think I can do much with my hand. This is ultimately just gonna serve me as a fold.
In a tough environment, if you play a really wide range of hands, everyone's going to know that, and they're going to stop folding to you. So the trick is really to have a range that's wide enough that you can play as many hands as possible, but not so wide that you lose your ability to effectively bluff. And I think that there are people who step over that line in one direction in terms of playing so many hands that now you can never bluff, and you also can't make a strong hand good enough, a strong hand often enough to offset that. And there are people who play on the other side of the spectrum where they don't play enough hands such that when they do make a strong hand, their opponents have no incentive to pay them off, basically. And you want to kind of be in that middle zone where, depending on the context and on the situation, sometimes you can make a big hand and get paid. Sometimes you can have a weak hand and bluff, and you can be adaptable, basically.
35.
7-6 of clubs is a hand that, at this depth, I'm going to VPIP against a shorter stack depth, say 100 BB open UTG 6 max. I would probably just fold. But at this depth, I think we can call. I think that I'm rather protected in the fact that he opened from this position, meaning that Hunt will be squeezing in this formation less frequently. Further, I think that I would like to allow Chris to remain in the pot. Therefore, I wouldn't use this hand as a 3-bet. The hands I would 3-bet here would mostly be incentivized not to call, meaning that when I forego my positional advantage, the only thing that could forego my positional advantage is actually a raise, because then he can 4-bet. So when I forego my positional advantage here, I would be choosing a large sizing. I don't necessarily want to do that with this hand class because it wouldn't necessarily be conducive in calling a 4-bet. So therefore, the conclusion I have is that I would call.
Okay, in general, I'm going to do a lot of checking in this spot. I might mix a small leading range, but to simplify, I'm just going to put this hand in the checking range.
So this is a board that interacts fairly well with my range. When I call from the button here, I'm going to have a lot of queen jack suited, 8-9 suited, ace queen offsuit hand classes. Therefore, turning a hand like this into a bluff while I have a lot more available bluffs in my range is a negative. So I think that also the fact that there is no club on the board is further negative, in that if I'm going to release the showdown nature of my hand, that means I'm probably going to shell off with this hand because there's no club, because I have a lot of available bluffs that are better than this hand. I don't want to release the showdown nature of my hand. However, we still lose this pot at a high frequency simply because he's going to have a lot of availability to delay. However, on board middling cards, I believe that he's going to double check, which is nice for our hand. We get to overrealize our equity. So for now, because of all the things I said above, not wanting to release the showdown nature of my hand, not wanting to barrel off with this hand, this is going to function as a turn, as a flop check.
Again, my hand could go either way. I think I'm gonna play it as a half pot bet, but it's not a big deal at all.
40.
Facing turn half pot, this is a hand that is going to function as a call fold, meaning I'm going to call the turn, look to be folding most rivers. Pocket threes improved his 3-3, which was a flop give up that now turned to set. He also just has hands like ace 10 that checked flop, some potential hands like king jack, king 9 suited that chose to check flop. So I think this is a spot where we want to call simply because he can have hands like suited wheels that are trying to bet with reasons of, blowing off our deuces, 4s, 5s, 6s, things like that. So this is just a hand that we want to just look to call. It's going to give us some protection on like 7 rivers, 6 rivers, where some of our other hands, say like jack 10 or ace queen or ace jack, that might be playing similarly, might have to fold. So because my flop check back range is going to be rather protected with hands like ace queen, ace jack, 10x region hands, as well as some 8-9, and all those hands are going to call the turn, we're going to have a lot of distribution on the river in terms of board coverage, meaning we can look to call this card, and if bad cards fall on the river for this exact hand, we'll have other cards in our hands we'll have other cards, effectively we'll have other cards in our range to cover for that. So for now, this is going to be a turn call and then looking to play rivers accordingly.
Okay, so I pot controlled the flop. My hand turned into a protection bet with a little bit of value on the turn. I think I still have enough showdown value in the checking line, like not a lot, but some, that this hand doesn't play all that great to be bluffing here. So that theme seems to keep coming up. It's like, when do you turn hands with slight showdown value into a bluff? In general, when you expect your opponent to be folding way too much. Or sometimes in cases where ranges are very, very narrow, in which case you just run out of bluffs. So just checking here and we'll try to navigate.
All right, so once we land on this river, we have to analyze what range we have that calls the turn. And if we look at that, it's gonna be hands like ace jack, jack nine, ace queen, king jack, king nine suited, queen 10 suited, etc. So because the queen has improved the EV of our overall range so much, that means that the 7 has now downgraded into one of the worst hands in our overall range, meaning this hand probably wants to turn itself into a bluff. So now what is the target? The target's gonna be hands like he has some ace 10, hands like pocket 9s, hands like pocket 8s that we're betting for protection. Therefore, we wanna choose a bet size that represents the entirety of our range, meaning we wanna be able to represent a hand like ace queen, hand like queen jack. Therefore, we wanna choose something in the vicinity of like 50 to 60% pot. We don't necessarily want to polarize because we don't have key cards in our hand. So maybe if we had a hand like jack 10, we would polarize, things like that. However, I think we just want to choose a size that's representative of a weak king towards a queen X type hand class. Therefore, we're going to choose something like $80.
Okay, Chin's betting about half pot. It's an interesting spot where I would have to make some pretty big assumptions to check call. That said, I do like the prospects. I do sort of like the prospects of check raising, just because he used a slightly smaller sizing, which leads me to believe that he's deep hold. I think I'm going to do it just because I think it actually is quite good versus the sizing. If I get called light, maybe it'll be the start of some interesting meta, but I think it puts him in a fairly hard spot. If he's capable of going thin to begin with, he really needs to be capable of making stands versus a raise. And just for what it's worth, like in this specific instance, with no information exchange up to this point, I'm targeting the deep hold sizing. If he had gone larger, I don't think I would be as interested in check raising. I think I would just be folding. So sizing looks like it's going to be about 4 to 5x is usually the sweet spot here for trying to pull off what I'm trying to do. I could go with an overbet size too, but I don't really see a ton of benefits, especially when I don't hold a relevant blocker. So he's making it 80. I think I'm just gonna make it like 320 and get on with it.
320?
I mean, normally this hand is a pretty natural check bet fold. We're pretty far down in our distribution. We would probably be turning hands like queen jack suited into a bluff at some frequency here when check raise, blocking queen queen, blocking ace jack. However, when he chooses the check flop option, he's effectively saying that now he has exactly ace jack, which is fair. Our hands just can't really do much here. He can have his own queen jack, his own jack 10, his own ace 10. I just think this line's just fucking over bluffed. I don't know why. He just doesn't want to check call ace 10, doesn't want to check call jack 10. I have jack 9. He probably c-bets jack 9. I think this line's just over bluffed like fucking King sick. I don't know. My gut's telling me to raise, but it would look really fucking stupid. I don't know. I don't have a lot of analysis for you guys, but I think I'm just gonna pull the trigger and look fucking stupid. I think this hand is very, like, this line's just over bluff.
$1,080.
Okay, so now Chin's repping pretty much exactly ace-jack. I don't think that he can afford to raise worse there. The other problem with even considering anything with my hand is that I could potentially lose to a worse bluff. But I'm trying to see if that's even true right now. That would require for him to be like value betting ace-queen for really thin and then re-bluffing it, which I think is just really unlikely, especially since that hand has good calling blockers. So, I mean, I think this is just a spot that's really under-bluffed. I'm just trying to sense into if there's any inkling that Chin would have a reason to go for this. Or what type of hand could even have been bluffing river. The only thing I keep looking at is there's definitely more ace-x suited hands in his range than there would probably normally be because of this depth, which makes me a little bit more suspicious, but like only because that ace has the relevant blocker to play the re-raise. I mean, I'm just gonna fold because I'm verging on potentially doing something really silly without enough justification for it. But I mean, yeah, the one thing that is a little bothersome is how polarized he actually is. You know, basically putting him on only ace-jack. That said, he has quite a few combos of it to take this line. It makes sense to call pre. It makes sense to check the flop. It makes sense to bet the river, clearly.
I can't believe that. I'm the fucking best.